Normally you jack up the diff just to get the tire off the ground to take some leverage off the upper ball joint. We're fortunate enough here to have an overhead crane, so I'm going to use that instead. I started by turning the wheel to the outside just to get to the upper caplet a little bit easier. We'll have to straighten it out eventually after we get it apart, putting it back together, but for now this gives you a little bit more room to work with, easier to get to. Normally you'd start by taking the set screw out of the body to get the cap off. Mine unfortunately don't have any because I got them out of the scrap bin just as a test model. So just a little Allen key counterclockwise, and you should be able to unscrew the cap, which we'll do next. So as you can see on this cap, it's got a few thousand K on it and it's super dirty. So I take a drill bit, try and find where the spanner holes are, and just clean the holes out. You only really need 2. If you want to do 4, that's fine. But then you can get the spanner wrench in there to crack these loose. Now that we got the cap off, I'm going to undo the nut on the pin. So just your regular old 24 mil, or I think it's a 15/16. Now that I got the nut undone on here, you can see the U-joint's in the way, so this is where I'd pick the diff up and then spin the axle shaft so I can get to the nut with a punch, so we can get the pin unseated from the knuckle. I'm just going to use this big piece of solid stock. You find a punch or whatever you please to try and unseat this pin. Simple as that. Use your old nut, not the new one. This is where you have to wiggle with the jack, maybe grab someone to help you push back and forth on the knuckle just to get the pin to fall out easier. It is still capable of doing it with one person, but 2 definitely makes it easier. Just like that. So the next step is going to be taking the spiral lock out to get the insert actually out of the body. So there's a little notch right there. Have a pain some days, like today. And then it just spins out. And you pop the insert out of it. Then I'm going to take my pick and go around and try and find the little notch in the spiral lock. And then you can try and pry it out. You must have patience for this sometimes. And I got the one end out here, so I'm just gonna walk it out. And that part's done. So to get this other insert out, I also don't have ball joint boots on mine, so you would need to pull that out of the way. But this is where you'd have the jack underneath, and you could just pick it up, and your knuckle will actually walk away from the inner C. And then you have all the room in the world to try and knock that insert up. Now that we got all the internals out of this upper ball joint, I'm just going to give it a quick wipe, make sure there's no debris that fell into it. I mean, if you got air, you could blow it out as well. This truck, I'm not particularly too worried because it's kind of a test truck. So getting the new insert in, I might not want to seat all the way down just because of debris or whatever maybe that would still be in there. So I'm going to drop it in the hole and then I'm gonna take my old insert, put it on top, and just give it a little tap. Just to seat it down and where it wants to be at home. And then you can see the little groove, we can put the spiral lock back in. New spiral lock, start with one corner. I like to try and walk it in by hand as much as possible. And then I use my pick, and then just walk it back in as well. Make sure it's fully seated. It shouldn't be sticking out more than the insert. If it is, your insert's not all the way down. Now that we got the insert in with the new spiral lock, we got our new pin. So normally you'd be able to just drop this in, but because we still have it up in the air, I gotta drop the truck down and bring that knuckle back to where it wants to be. Now this would be where you'd have a second hand to kind of push on the outer knuckle to bring it back in. I unfortunately don't have that, so we're gonna have to manipulate it a little bit. I think this is where I gotta straighten the wheels actually. There we go. That should be enough for me able to get the nut on. Okay, now that I got the wheel turned again, I'm going to put the install nut on. So what this does is it's going to seat that pin into the knuckle nice and tight, so I can bust this off and then put the nylock on, and we can tighten this all up and get the cap on it. I'm leaving the cap off right now just so I can see if the pin's still turning easily. So the install nut's now on there. Everything's nice and tight. I've seen the pin sink down into its home, so I'm gonna bust that off, and then we can put our nylock on for final assembly. Because they're doing this in the truck and the axle shaft's in the way, normally you torque this upper ball joint to 90 foot-pounds. If you got a crowfoot, you could still torque it properly. But for what I'm doing, I'm just gonna tighten this up nice and snug with my wrench. Sometimes it's hard to see, so leaving the cap off, I can put my finger on there. And as I'm tightening it, I can feel if this pin's still turning. If it is, I'm gonna have to reuse that install nut again and try and torque it again. If you still do have an issue, you can put a pry bar in between the knuckle and inner C and put tension on it and tighten it that way. That has worked for us numerous times, but I'm fortunate enough that I don't have to today. Now that it's all torqued down to spec, I'm gonna put my old rusty cap back on this thing. Set her down. Put a set screw in here since I now know I have one on this one body, and we'll be back driving. When I'm tightening down this upper cap, I'm basically just gonna put her down snug, use my spanner wrench. It's not going anywhere, it's nice and tight, call that a day. Then the last and final step is the set screw. I was unaware I had them on this body. Or maybe they're not tapped, I'm not sure. But I'm just gonna try and clean out this hole as best possible. You don't need to kill this thing, all it's doing is holding the cap tight. So I'm gonna go to that. I'm happy with it. Just like that, folks. We put a new pin in the upper rebuild kit in this 2006 Ram 3500 on the floor, basically, with no special tools.